I'm Mary Claire Murphy, and I'm so delighted to introduce to you today Bruce Wolosoff, who is a pianist and composer. And also, I've heard the term musical alchemist thrown around a bit because he's just very at home with a variety of musical idioms: classical, jazz, blues, even rock. So I'm very excited to hear more about Bruce's world and the new album that he has. It's called
Thank,
Memento. So
thank
welcome
you,
to you,
Mary Claire.
Bruce. Yeah, it's
Thank you.
great
It's
to
it's
be
a pleasure to
speaking
be
with
here with you.
you. So you currently live in New York, is that right?
I live on a little island. I'm an expatriate from New York City. I moved out to a little island called Shelter Island, which is about 100 miles from the city, and you get here by a ferry boat. I moved here 28 years ago.
28 years ago. So where did you grow up then?
I was born in New York City, and I grew up in the suburbs in the North Shore of Long Island in Great Neck,
Mhm.
and was part of that community there.
Did you come from a musical family?
Well, yes and no. Let me see. My stepdad was a very good amateur jazz pianist in a stride style, like a swing with the left hand that's going boom, da, 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 very sort of happy piano. Um, and my mom used to refer to it as cat house piano. And my on my mother's side, her uncle was a very, very famous cantor by the name of Yesela Rosenblatt, who made a bunch of recordings. And I get a lot of cred when I go into a synagogue for that. They'll say, "Oh, Yesela Rosenblatt's grandnephew or something is here," and they hope I can sing, and I don't sing very well. So.
So when did you start playing piano then?
Well, I was very little. There was a piano in the house, and I was fascinated by the thing. It was my friend. I was a little kid, and my older sister, got lessons. A teacher came to the house, and I desperately wanted lessons, and um, so they let me begin when I was 3, and that changed things a little. There's something about like when you're doing it just yourself and exploring, and there's no right and wrong, and suddenly, there's an external arbiter of what's good and what's not good, and what's right and what's not right. And I think that's an issue for a lot of us. I think intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic. So yeah, I had lessons, and then I discovered rock music. I'm born in 1955, so I was a kid when the Beatles came out, and it was very exciting. Suddenly, I felt like, wow, this is my music. This is rock and roll was incredible and so energetic, and I listened to the radio constantly, and became kind of a rock and roll freak. So I had my classical lessons, and then I'd be getting together with my friends and playing all the latest rock songs and jamming, and that became very much a part of my life. Then I wanted to get, uh, I heard Charlie Parker, my mind was blown. I heard Bill Evans, my mind was blown. One after another, these incredible artists. And I'd want to know, like, okay, what makes that tick? How do you do that? Can I do that? Can I play like Chick Corea? So I'd spend, a lot of time practicing and trying to figure out how to approach that kind of sound. Like I never learned how to play like Chick Corea, but I think I understand somewhat the elements he's working with. And eventually I got more into composing because I was playing a lot of modern music. It was going more and more towards modern music and playing music by friends of mine. And I thought, why am I practicing their stuff? Why don't I write my own stuff? And so I stopped performing for 19 years and came back to it playing my own music, which was a big shift. And in recent years, I'm including older repertoire as well as my own music and performing more again.
Mm. What an interesting journey you've had so far. You mentioned getting together with some of your friends and playing
Sure.
some tunes from those, the Beatles or what other inspirations at the time. Did you have any funky rock band names that we have to know about?
Yeah, for sure. Let me see. Okay, in 7th grade, there was Fire, the Red Hot Band. And
Nice.
yeah, very good. Let me see. Also, middle school, Oracle, Oracle. These were just we played at parties and dances at the temple and at the school and stuff like that, and in my garage. And then when I was in high school, I played in a group called Biscuit Davis that actually got a little bit of traction. We played a lot in New York, and we put out a record on. We were a jam band. We put out a record on Flying Dutchman Records, which was produced by the very famous producer Bob Thiel. But I think that might be because our lead guitarist was Bob Thiel Jr.
Oh. So that one you said was Biscuit Davis?
Biscuit Davis. Yeah, we were a jam
And
band.
where did that name come from?
Not from me.
It just presented itself from the
Yeah,
ether.
no. Someone else came up with it. They were pre-existing, and I joined in. I
Yeah,
was invited to join them.
very fun.
When I was in college, I played a lot with a musician named Elliot Sharp, who and another fella, Steve Piccolo, who started the Lounge Lizards. And yeah, I don't know.
I'd love to hear more
What?
about your various teachers, because you've definitely experimented in all these different styles, and each
Yeah.
teacher brings their own musical legacy with them. And I
Mhm.
just wondering about how they've influenced the way that you compose or perceive or perform music.
Yeah, for sure. Um, with regard to, I've had great piano teachers. I was blessed in that area, and the composition unfolded a little differently. So I, I had piano lessons at a very young age, and had to eventually sort of relearn technique later on when I met Herman Diaz, who became my um, principal teacher, my main teacher. He was a student of Claudio Arrau, and there's a technique that Claudio Arrau developed. People say he got it from his teacher, Martin Krause, who was a student of Franz Liszt. So they say the technique was from Krause observing Liszt. I don't know if that could be apocryphal. But if you look at videos of Arrau playing, he has a beautiful sound, and everything looks so easy. It's because he's using his arms a lot, and it's not just fingers. And so that became a kind of a retraining I had to do. And Herman was my sort of like my musical father. He really taught me how to play the piano. And I had other excellent teachers, Eveline Crochet, Richard Good. I was fortunate I had some classes with George Bollett, the great Cuban pianist. And then in the jazz world, as a teenager, a man named Tony Aless, who had been the pianist in Woody Herman's band and also on staff at CBS, opened up a studio in my hometown. And he introduced me to Bill Evans, and not personally, to the music of Bill Evans, and to Charlie Parker and Bud Powell and people like that. Then when I went to New England Conservatory as a classical piano major, I was walking in the hallway one day and I saw this guy, and I didn't know who he was or what he taught, but whatever he was teaching, I wanted it. The look in this guy's eye, I never saw somebody before and said, wow, there's a genius. You could just see it coming off of him. And a lot of times people try to look like geniuses and they're not. It's like it's always, usually the normal person who you would never suspect. But this guy, there was something about his energy, and it was Jackie Byard, the great jazz pianist and composer, who was an enormous influence on my life. Really stimulated my creativity and taught me to embrace different styles and to work off of materials when improvising, to write things based on exploring specific material. And Jackie was just a wonderful human being, and very important to me. And I also had lessons with a man named Charlie Banakis, who was a legend in the Boston area. He's a jazz teacher. I'm not a very good jazz pianist. I never became a very good jazz pianist. So I wasn't necessarily one of Charlie's best students in that area, but we became good friends, and I learned an awful lot from him about music in general. and about how to try to solve a problem. So I really wanted to be a composer, but I wasn't. I was a pianist, and one day I played at a friend's graduation recital at the Juilliard School, and afterwards there was a group of us going to a local bar, and I was walking with one of my friend's teachers, Larry Widows, and he's a funny guy, a really nice, hysterical. He was Chevy Chase's stepfather. And I said to Larry, he said, "I wish I could play like you." And I said, "Oh, I wish I could compose like you." And he said, "I'll teach you." And so every Friday afternoon, I went up to his apartment, and he was so funny. We would just spend the whole time laughing. But the lessons essentially consisted of Larry saying, "Okay, what are you hearing?" And I'm expecting him to give me all this theoretical stuff, and he's going, "What are you hearing?" "Well, I'm hearing this." He goes, "Okay, how do you get that sound?" And so he kind of led me through the process. And after about a year of "What are you hearing?" One day he said, "Good, well, where's it going?" And so we started to discuss narrative and form, and having a trajectory to your line, because you sit at the piano and you play something and almost anything sounds good, but what are you going to do with it? How are you going to create a piece out of that? And for me, I still believe in I'm a dinosaur in this regard. I still believe in melody and music as storytelling, and he got me going. And I found I return again and again to sketches. I have a very active I'm talking a lot, I'm sorry. I have
No, please go
a,
ahead.
a very active relationship with my sketchbooks and my piles of manuscript that are around the house. And I go back in and see, and I'm still finding things from, the early 80s, and, my time working with Jackie Byard, where I think like, oh, that's a cool thing. Why don't I do something with that? And it's almost like if a photographer were, with analog photography, they used to mark up their contact sheets and see which images they were going to develop and work on. It's almost like going back and saying, "Oh, wait a second, I didn't do that one. That was really the one I should have developed." So yeah, it's ongoing. I could keep changing. I revise pieces endlessly, and I'm about to perform a piece for the first time myself that other people have performed and recorded. And now that I'm playing the piano part, I'm changing it, and just giving myself the freedom to do that, even though it's already been recorded and released. That's a little confusing. There'll be some marketing questions afterwards, but the 2023 version.
Right.
Long answer. I apologize.
So you mentioned that you love and believe in a melody, which reminded me when I was listening to your music before our conversation today, I came across a quote from you. I actually have it here in front of me. You said that you've lived long enough now not to be ashamed to open your heart and unleash a beautiful, simply stated tune. And I was very struck by that comment. Does it imply that at some point you did feel ashamed about composing or performing just a beautiful melody?
Heck yeah. Heck yeah. I mean, okay, so as a classical music student in a university or conservatory setting in the United States in the 70s, melody was very out of fashion. You were supposed to write sort of in a post Anton Webern style, kind of, what do we call it now? Beep squawk kind of stuff.
I
Things
know
with a
what you
lot of
mean.
leaps, and when people go, "Oh my God, I hate modern music," and yeah. So I mean, in those years, Rachmaninoff wasn't considered a great composer by the people in the schools. He was just, "Oh, he's just popular." Meanwhile, Rachmaninoff's work has entered the repertory. It's being played all over the world. And no, he's not really that good. This guy in some university crunching numbers is really good. I don't think so. And so a lot of composers who have subsequently become very accepted as part of mainstream. It's hard to say what's mainstream. There's so many streams, but composers like Britten and Shostakovich, Samuel Barber, composers who did write melodies, weren't considered hip. back in, back in my student days. And so, yeah, it's taken some growing up and some walking away from everything and then saying like, okay, I'm not a kid anymore. I've lived a lot of life, and who am I living for? Why? Who? Through whose eyes do we see ourselves? And I just want to be honest, and I want to do something that sounds meaningful to me, that feels meaningful to me. And would I want to hear this music on the radio? Um, I don't know. You know what? A lot of times I'll sit down to write, and I want to listen to music, and I don't know what I want to listen to, and I'll be scanning around through Spotify and just trying to find, oh, this, no, not that. And I realize, no, what you want to listen to is this thing that you need to go write. Something on the
Yes,
piano.
I do think people are very moved by authenticity. It's just nice to hear someone being themselves, whatever voice that may be. Do you
Hmm.
feel like in the present day, some of those pressures still exist, or do you think we're branching away from that? Where are we now compared to your student days?
Yeah, well, certainly a lot more open. I think that the classifications get so confusing. I'm a Grammy voter, and I don't understand. I don't know the difference between album of the year and record of the year. I don't get it. All these sort of micro genres, and um, I think it was Duke Ellington, who said there's, two kinds of music: good music and maybe less good music. Um, I don't get the genre thing so much. I have trouble hearing it. And so, for example, this new album of mine, I'm not quite sure. Like, will it be up for a Grammy? I don't know. In what category? Well, I don't know where I would put it. I wouldn't put it in the straight classical. It wouldn't. It would get creamed there. Um, and it's not. I don't know. It's not crossover. It's this other thing I seem to be doing, where I'm creating some sort of hybrid language, and I don't know what to call it. So maybe someday somebody will call it something, and there'll be a category in the Grammys for it. But in the meantime, I don't have high Grammy hopes for this record.
Maybe this style will be the new ism in the future.
Right, right.
We'll see. Well, since you mentioned, I mean, let's talk more about this album. It's called Memento, and what is it a memento of, would you would say?
Good question. It's a memento of different inspirations I've had at different times, different experiences. Each piece on that record has a point of departure um, in the arts, a line of poetry, a painting, other music that I've heard that it's responding to, and Memento, calling it Memento. And I don't know if you see the album cover, that photo of me sort of walking down the beach in a big black coat, um, with my back towards the audience. It seems like, okay, well, maybe I'm moving towards one of the later chapters of my life. And what do you carry with you? What do you bring forward? What do you remember? What do you leave behind?
It sounds very personal, like a personal album. Would you agree that it comes from a deep place?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's really personal. Um,
There's a work on there I noticed called Letter to a Friend. What's
mm,
that one about?
okay. Well, that one is actually really tongue in cheek. It sounds very serious, but it started out. Oh, okay. Um, it started out that there was this friend of mine. There is a friend of mine who, for many years, ran Penguin Books, and I used to tease him with puffin jokes, and like if he'd come to visit, I'd have puffin breakfast cereal, because puffin's a baby penguin, and so this piece started out being called The Puffin. It was dedicated to him, and he's he's British, and so there's, I don't know, the unconscious works in funny ways. I found myself quoting William Byrd, the Elizabethan composer, sort of referencing his style of riffing in the middle, because British Byrd. Um, I don't know. Why? What do you think? What do you think about it?
I was just curious. I liked how in the program notes, actually, there was a comment too that it starts out not really knowing where to go, which is a feeling that you often get when you're writing a letter, like, dear so and so, okay, what's
Mm,
my first line? How do I dive
yeah,
in? And then
yeah.
it becomes more and more fluid as it goes. So I thought that just really paralleled the narrative of writing, the experience of writing a letter in a
Mm,
neat way too. It was fun to listen to.
very good. Thank you.
Uh,
I'm going to give your answer next time.
well, I noticed there are several works based on paintings as well, and visual art has been an inspiration for you. Could you tell us more about that set on the album?
Sure, yeah. Um, I was doing a lot of writing pieces inspired by visual art, and I wanted to write some piano pieces and sort of like nocturnes. Um, so I found some paintings that were evocative of night imagery and used those. And one of them's by a painting by my wife, Margaret Garrett, and another one's by David Sally, who's a friend. And then I got a Van Gogh in there and a Munch. And each one has its own sound world. They're not like each other. They're the most classical sounding pieces on the record, or romantic, rather. Uh,
Interesting. So do those include improvisation too, or do you feel like those are more set, being, as you mentioned, more classical?
well, they're all set. If I wrote it all down. If somebody wanted to take some freedom and embellish something, I would hope that they would have like very good taste and do that in a tasteful way. But typically, there's a lot of improvisation that goes on as I find my way towards a composition. Finding the initial ideas and fooling around with things, and then saying, "Oh, okay, I've got this now. Let me use that as the point of departure." And eventually, you repeat it, and you arrive at, okay, this is the way it goes. Now it's a composition. So improvisation for me is a pathway towards composition.
Hmm. And is there anything else that you would love for our listeners to know about this album? Other pieces that you want to highlight, or what the process was like for you?
Mm, yeah, well, each one's different. There are two pieces on there that people tend to want to talk about the most, and those are Dido's Blues and Improvisation on the Ground by Henry Purcell. Those are both inspired by bass lines I lifted from Henry Purcell. And when I was a kid jamming in my garage with my friends, um, we would very often, take a bass line from, I don't know, Led Zeppelin or Jimi Hendrix, some one of those great solid bass lines, and we would jam off of it for the longest time and just try to see how creative we could get with it, and kind of freak each other out. And so I thought, well, okay, I'm a grown up now and I'm a composer and everything. What happens if I do this to some classical bass lines? And I found a rich vein of them in the early Baroque times. Monteverdi's got some really nice ones. And so I was just going through and hunting for bass lines, and got a whole folder of them, and would jam off them. And these two in particular um, they became pieces that I feel are successful pieces. A lot of people like the title track, Memento, which for me was a kind of response to the sound world of Piazzolla. And I'd been listening to his work, and I'd written a tango movement, a tango section in the middle of my cello concerto. And, he was on my mind, and I was taking a walk, and I started hearing this thing. And I was walking where the album cover was shot, and came home and just wrote it down. It was a good day.
One thing I always love asking composers, and when you start hearing something, What is it that you hear? Is it a melody? Is it a rhythm? Is it everything all together? I think it's different
Mm,
for some
mm,
people. What is it like
mm.
when you have it in your mind like that?
Yeah, yeah. Any of the above. I'll take anything. Anything that gets us right.
Just
Anything
a
that gets
seed,
us. Yeah.
something.
Just give me something, and then yeah, it's a rhythm. It's a lot of times it's like a mood. You're in, like my wife will look at me and she'll go, something wrong? Because I'm like, I got this weird look in my face, like something's wrong. It's because I'm overcome by some mood, which hasn't yet found sound to express it. And so then you have to sort of find, okay, what's the rhythm? What's the harmony? What's the harmonic world look like? What planet am I on, musically? And it, hopefully it finds its way to being. They don't always.
Bruce, it's been just so wonderful talking with you today about your new album, Memento. It's a wonderful project, and there's so much variety there. I think our listeners are just going to love it. So I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us about it today.
Thank you, Mary Claire. I've really enjoyed our conversation.